Well, hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Real Estate Investing. I'm your host, Sharon Vorenholt, and I'm so glad you're tuning in today. My guest today is Minneapolis investor Amber Miller. Amber has been rehabbing houses for more than 10 years. She's done well over 100 properties, and she does a beautiful job. I can tell you that firsthand. So today we're going to talk about flipping houses, and we're also going to talk about her brand new course called House Flip Blueprint. Welcome to the show, Amber.
Thank you for having me, Sharon. I'm so excited to share real estate information with your listeners.
Well, I'm excited to have you on here because most of the rehabbers I know do rental rehabs, and I know that you do primarily homes that are going to be sold to an end buyer, and you do what I call a step-up house. So you do really do a beautiful job, and I'd like for people to learn more about house flipping in general. So why don't you tell them a little bit about your story and how you got started, because you weren't always doing exactly what you're doing today.
Yeah, that's very, very true. So for years as an adult, I used to have the thought in my head that I was going to start my own business, and I just wasn't sure exactly what that looked like. And real estate investing is something that kind of kept coming up over and over again, and I just wasn't prepared to move forward with it. And when I was, I kind of started to, this is old school, but some of the courses online, not even online, they were on TV, Carlton Sheets, and I would see these, make money in real estate with no money down. And so I kind of started to dig in a little bit. And most people that I talked to about it, when it was like the sandwich lease option type stuff or house flipping, a lot of people said that was illegal and it wasn't allowed, and that wasn't a viable way to create a business or invest in real estate. So I kind of put it to the back burner, and right around 2007, I decided I needed to try to see if this was something that I liked, and I thought house flipping seemed the easiest route for me. So bought my first house, renovated it, not a huge renovation budget, made a little bit of profit on it, and decided that this was something that I wanted to pursue. And around the same time, of course, the market was transitioning and crashing, and everybody was wondering what was going to happen. So I put my business plan together, and I went and met with bankers, and everybody kind of patted me on the head and said, this is great, but this isn't what we're looking for. We don't have an appetite for this type of investment strategy right now. And they tried to encourage me to do more rental properties, which I'd owned a couple of rental properties, and I didn't love it. And so I decided if I was going to know that this was going to fly or move forward, I had to figure out my own way. I literally took a cash advance on a credit card, and I bought a house. And I just kept taking that success from each of those small projects and parlaying it into the next one until 6 years later, when I left my full-time job and went into real estate full-time. I got my real estate license, and now I renovate and design and sell houses full-time. And I have been doing that. It's actually my 6-year anniversary that I left my job.
Oh, cool. So how many years did you invest part-time then?
Oh, part-time was, almost 6.
6, okay. So that seems to be a sweet spot somewhere. Actually, I'd say you got out early. More people that I've talked to are at about the 10-year mark. That's when they managed to escape. So you escaped the 9 to 5 a little bit sooner.
I did. And I will say that along that 6-year path as well, the market rebounded. And so my strategy had to change as well. When I first was buying houses, I would literally sort neighborhoods, and I would have the agent that I worked with at the time, I would have them send me the absolute cheapest houses possible. I didn't care what neighborhoods they were in. I just wanted to learn everything I could. And as long as there was an opportunity for a resale, and a budget that was doable for me at the time, I was fine. When the market started to shift, and I would say it was probably around 2012, 2011, I actually changed my philosophy a little bit with buying, and I started to buy houses in neighborhoods that were more desirable, because at that point I felt that if there was a shift again and I did need to take something on as a rental as my backup strategy, I would be comfortable that I could get a tenant in place that would cover the mortgage and the renovations that have been done.
Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of investors that changed their buying criteria at that same time, which meant at that time when the market changed was when I began wholesaling, and my end buyers, they said the house has to cash flow if we can't sell it to a retail buyer. So
Absolutely.
I had to change my business model for buying, where before, if it was a straight out good retail sale, it didn't really matter. That wasn't the only thing they had to look at. It had to be, it had to cash flow as a rental. So yeah, that was true for just about everybody during that period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about for somebody that's brand new, where do you get started? What's the first thing you do?
Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to assess where you're at and know what numbers work for you. So some people might have dabbled in real estate investing before, and they may see a house down the street from their own and think that they could make some money off of it, and they're comfortable with whatever that expense might be for the purchase and the renovations. That's a different scenario than somebody who's maybe just getting started and looking to just learn and just needs enough of a spread to make a bit of a profit. Knowing what your personal numbers are is going to be a big deal. And knowing those numbers is often tied into the neighborhoods you're looking at. So if it's a neighborhood where maybe it's a lower price point, it's maybe like a C or D type neighborhood, know that those are going to have some unique challenges. And know that the end buyers with those properties as well may have different programs that they're using to finance the house. So it's a different buyer. They have different expectations for finishes than somebody in a different price point. But you have to be comfortable with the house you're taking on. So you need to be comfortable with the purchase price. You need to be comfortable with the renovation budget. Some houses might need, $30,000, $40,000 in work. Some homes might be an entire gut job and have a budget of more than $100,000. If that's your first project and you don't have someone that you can rely on to help you go through that, that might be more challenging. It might take longer, so that's going to require more holding costs. It might change the time you go on in the market. So there's all these variables, and you really have to decide early on what you're comfortable with. Because if you meet with an agent to help you find a house and submit an offer, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what's your budget?
Don't you think your skill level too plays into it? If you're brand new, you have a whole lot more risk doing more of an upscale renovation. Because you tend to get emotional. Your choices aren't always based on the numbers. They're based on, oh, isn't that pretty?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if it can be pretty, but the numbers have to work for it to be pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live in a world where we're surrounded by all of these images of beautiful houses, and you go on Instagram and Pinterest and you see these gorgeous kitchens. Well, some of those features that you're seeing are custom, and they're in renovations that maybe were $150,000 for a kitchen alone. And it's easy to want to over improve, but that's actually one of the top things that people make a mistake with flips, is they over improve them. And I would say right now too, with the market being what it is, I'm seeing people who are pricing really high, and they're not making improvements that are up to that price point level either. So I'm seeing people cut corners. I was looking at a house the other day, and it actually has original wallpaper, or what appears to be original wallpaper in it, and they didn't remove it. They're just calling it vintage. And they're at a price point that's absolutely the top of the market, and that's not a good place to be for either a seller or a buyer, to be honest, because the house has to show that the level of work is comparable to what the value is that they're being asked to pay for it from an appraisal standpoint when the buyer comes in, because most often they're going to have a lender.
Yeah, because if you've got to go in and fix vintage, it's almost always expensive.
Yeah. And with this particular house too, I could tell by the photos, it didn't appear that the dishwasher and the stove were going to clear each other, and there was a cabinet in the way. It looked like you would have trouble navigating the kitchen, and I could tell that just from the photos. So that tells me that that's probably somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience renovating. And again, they're at the top of the market, and I don't want to see anybody starting out make those types of mistakes.
So once someone has determined the neighborhoods that are right for them, which we're back again to the money, how much available cash do you have, what's the level of rehab you can do, then how do you, once you've got a handle on your numbers in your neighborhood and all of that, how do you find a house? How would you tell people to start looking for a house?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways to find a house. And I will tell you, this is something I got really hung up on when I was first starting to invest. I was absolutely terrified of working with agents.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I was terrified of working with agents is I had some experiences that weren't great.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned through that is you're the client. And so if there's something that doesn't sit well with you about that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable to move on.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find agents who, and I say agents because primarily when you're getting started, that's going to be your number one resource for finding deals. Because you're going to, most people still list on the MLS, right? So you've got estates being listed on the MLS, you've got distressed homes, people in unique situations, and they're not all retail buyer ready homes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking on the MLS, you're working with an agent, know that when you're working with an agent and they say they're investor friendly, that means different things for different people. And so my situation was I had an agent who we had written a few offers. We'd been in multiple offer situations with all of the properties. And they said, basically, I wasn't worth the investment in their time because nothing was coming to fruition.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that is just like me, they don't make any money if they're not writing offers. And so it wasn't like we were just driving around and looking at houses and nobody was submitting offers. We were submitting offers, they were just getting declined because we were being outbid, which comes back to how is your agent kind of guiding you in this process, because that's part of it. And not every agent's gonna be able to get you every house. But that does go back to their knowledge of the market and resale. So, and that comes back to when you're starting out, you need somebody who can give you the numbers. You need somebody who can say, this is what this house is going to sell for, because that's not something you can normally come up with on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, don't you think it's valuable, though, to have an agent that's also an investor? I know a lot of agents that also invest, and I found that they were by far better at helping me find houses off the MLS.
Absolutely. So that's the key with agents as well. They should, if they're an investor themselves or they work with other investors,
Mm-hmm.
they should have some different resources for you to find properties. So pre-list might be one, off market would be another one, maybe from other agents in their office.
Mm-hmm.
If they're also an investor or they've worked with investors, they're also going to be a super helpful resource when it comes to the renovations and the level of renovation that you need to do in that house
Mm-hmm.
to get that resale value. Because again, if you over improve, you're not necessarily going to get that back. And if you under improve, you're going to end up with a house in a neighborhood that maybe ends up sitting there longer with more holding costs for you. So there's incredible value in an experienced agent. And I have found that the people that you want to work with are oftentimes found at real estate meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you can find houses. Not only can you find good agents, you can potentially find contacts for contractors. You can find out who your investors are in your neighborhood and also who your wholesalers are,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't walk around on the street with a sandwich board on that says, I wholesale houses. Not usually.
Here I am.
Yeah, right. Talk to me about a house. Like, people don't really walk around like that. And finding people who are actively investing is 100% key.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when I first got started, I felt like I couldn't buy a house off the MLS. I felt like I had to have all these other strategies in place. So I did bandit signs, which in my market in Minneapolis is absolutely horrendous in the winter because our ground is frozen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those little wire frames don't hold up so well. I did some probate mailing.
Mm-hmm.
I did some direct mail, and it's, you know, it's a lot of work, and I felt like I had to do all of those things before I bought a house. And then when those things weren't coming to fruition, I thought to myself, well, I just have to figure out if I can even flip a house first. So that's why I went with the routed realtor. But I'm telling you, it probably took me, 4 or 5 agents before I found the right one. And oddly enough, the guy who ended up helping me the most for a couple of years was a newer agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he had some investment experience, but really his main deal was he played in a band at night.
Oh, okay. But he was motivated, so he was hungry. He was new, and he wanted to help.
He was hungry. He wasn't high stress. he didn't balk at all if I was like, hey, I want to go 40 minutes away and look at a house because the price is right.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be like, okay, when do you want to meet there? Like, he was really accommodating. You know, he'd meet me at 8 o'clock in the morning on a weekend if I needed him to, because I was working full time, and also, you know, raising kids and having a husband. And you know, he went to some pretty rough spots with me too. Like, telling me, like, you know, hey, like, and I will say that was helpful too, because, you know, having him there, he was like, yeah, you really don't want to do this.
Yeah.
It's a little bit tough, you know, but he was super accommodating, and I was really grateful for working with him, because the agents who said they were established and worked with investors and were foreclosure specialists, those were the guys who were not as accommodating, especially for a beginning investor.
Right. So I think it is key finding the right agent to work with, because you're going to waste a lot of time if you don't have the right agent, and they don't understand making agents that only do retail real estate do not really understand our offers when we make lowball offers. Their thinking is, well, it's 10% below market, so that's a great deal. And a lot of times it can be 20 or 30 and still not work out in the numbers. Right. So I think that's key. And I think you hit upon another thing, is you should definitely belong to your local REIA. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you find deals out of there, there's value there, because you find out who the major players are, like who's really buying. If you get a house that's not in your area and you want to wholesale it, you can find out who buys in that area. So there are lots of other advantages to belonging to your local REIA.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Okay. So we have found a house. Now it's like, what? Show me the money. Where do you get the money? Let's talk about the money.
So the money part, so this can actually tie in, I mean, this step you could be working on before you even find a house, because the reality is when you do find a house and submit an offer, your agent or whoever is submitting the offer on your behalf is going to have to give the seller proof of ability to financially perform. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the tips I like to share with people, and I like to say, you do not have to wait until you have a house to start researching these options. Right. Because there's different ways to purchase a house. You can purchase with cash. You can purchase using equity in another property that you have, as long as you know that you have that equity. So I've talked to people who have been in their own homes for a while, and they want to flip their first house, and they have decided that the cost of the money being used as that from their own equity is advantageous. So they're doing that, but that requires obviously that you have equity. Right. Not everybody's in that position. There's hard money lenders. Those are lenders who use the property as collateral, and oftentimes those lenders are going to charge a higher price for the money, but they're also going to, if you'd like, give you a percentage of the renovation repair money as well. So they can be a great option for you, just depending on what your situation is. If you are self-employed, they don't require W-2 income. Most of them don't, that I know of, but you can always Google that and find hard money lenders in your area. And then another option is using a private lender. So maybe someone that you know who has retirement funds that are in an IRA or an old 401k, and they're looking for some different options to diversify their portfolio. Maybe it's a friend or a family member who's interested in your business and helping to support that. That might be a good option as well. So there's a lot of different options, but with any of those, when you submit that offer, you'll need to know you need to provide either proof of funds. So if there's cash in an account somewhere you're going to be drawing from, you'll want to have that, or you'll want to have that approval letter. And if you're using any type of a traditional mortgage, you're going to require underwriting and a little bit longer approval time, so it's going to have a little bit longer ramp up. Oh, and one other thing too, I forgot to tell you this. Banks now, because they weren't on my radar. Actually, they didn't want anything to do with me back then. But banks now are doing more commercial lending in the rehab space. But the only way that I know about them is because they have now approached me. Mm-hmm. So for a new investor, I don't know that that's going to be your best route, but it's always something you can definitely ask about, especially if you've got a local bank or credit union that you have a relationship with.
Now, in my area, aside from cash or your equity, the next lowest cost loan as far as interest would be an investor-friendly bank. And I have to tell you, people don't go to Wells Fargo or PNC or one of those big places. It's going to be a local bank local to your area or credit union, and they're called portfolio lenders, which means they don't sell the loans they're not to Fannie Mae, or they're not government-backed loans, so they hold those loans in-house.
Yes.
If you have a job though, and you have a W-2 income and you're a part-time investor, in my area, you actually have an excellent chance of getting a loan. So they are the lowest cost as far as what I call buying money,
yes.
getting money for. And then like Amber said, your next level, and you should always be thinking who might have money that they might be willing to loan. And it may not be the most obvious person. Someone may look like a pauper, and that's why they look like a pauper. It's because they've saved every dime they've made.
Yeah.
And then hard money, people are reluctant to use hard money because it's expensive. And I mean, what's the rate in your area for people?
Standard is 15%. And then there's the origination fees on the loan.
And points and all of that. So it's expensive, but if you have a really good deal, it's just part of the cost of doing business. So there are times when you have to choose whether to forget the deal or use hard money. If there's enough money there, you want to use hard money every single time.
Right. And I think when you are in a situation, I transitioned to hard money when I left my career.
Right.
Because that was a good option for me at that time. And I had a couple different hard money lenders that I used, and they structured their loans a little bit differently. So I was able to offset. But what using hard money allowed me to do when I transitioned from primarily purchasing with cash was, instead of doing 2 projects at a time, I was able to do 4.
4, yeah.
So that was a big revelation for me as a business owner. Was, yes, there's a cost associated with that money, but would I rather make $50,000 and pay those fees, or would I rather make nothing and pay no fees because I couldn't do the deal?
Yeah.
And that's just an example, but you do have to look at that and decide which works best for you. And especially when you're doing this full time, it's a better option for me to take the deal than to walk on it.
Yeah.
So.
I think depending on, like you made a perfect example there, when you're trying to scale, it might be a matter of maybe you can get one deal with your investor-friendly bank and you get another one through hard money. You may be very often using a combination of different kinds of money.
Yes, and that's what I do now primarily.
Yeah.
So, and what has been really interesting in the last year or so is the 3 banks that I use, they all have a little bit different rate. So when I'm going to write a deal and fund it, I email all 3 of my guys and I'm like, okay, what's your rate right now? What's your rate? We're closing on one today, and I had one bank that was at 7 3/4, and then I had one bank that was at 6 1/2. So I went with my 6 1/2 bank because that was the better option for me. And then typically now what we're doing is we've got a private lender who bridges any renovation money that we need. So normally if we were going to bring money to the table on this deal, I have a private lender who comes in and bridges that gap for us. So we're actually putting a lot less down on the project. So that's been a strategy that we've been working in the last couple of years, and that's been nice too.
Yeah, so I remember at one time you had a lot of money sitting in houses of your own money, and so you're going to have to do that initially. You're going to have to put some money in, but if you structure it right and you go out and you become educated about money and how it all works, you can generally work it so that you have not a lot of money out of your pocket.
Right. And it also helped for me because we transitioned price points with houses too.
Right.
So the projects we're doing are more expensive than we used to buy. And then the renovation budgets are higher because the expectation for the end buyer and the resale requires that we do more work and have more upgrades and add a master bathroom and finish a basement. So they require more funding. So, and actually my, the private lender that I've been working with in the last couple of years is somebody I actually met 10 years ago. So remember that as you're on this journey, there might be people that you meet now who you have interaction with and you don't think much of it going forward, but then 10 years later you cross paths and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not flipping anymore. I'm looking to invest as a private lender. And you're like, oh great, here I am. So just remember that. It doesn't matter, where you meet somebody or how you meet them, they can always end up being part of your business down the road.
Yeah, that's where networking is so powerful. People sometimes, I think of it as they're kind of in the background and they're almost like just watching you. They're watching, and then one day they're ready and they will approach you. Like, I know that your relationships with your banks have changed, but they really do. They watch your progress. They watch your numbers. You don't always know they're doing that, but then one day an opportunity comes that you didn't previously have.
Yeah. And I would say, I don't think it's necessarily comfortable for most people to be networking when they go to these events, and you don't know, exactly who you're going to be meeting. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that people will overinflate their business or their strategy or their experience. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. But one thing that was helpful for me was I would go to these meetings and I would tell myself, okay, 3 people, like just talk to 3 people and just find out what they're doing, what's going on, how they got started, maybe what their business model looks like. Is there, and I think when you're networking, if you can find out the questions that you ask about other people, make them interested in you. So if you try to go up to a group and say, hey, my name is Amber and I'm a house flipper in Minneapolis and I'm looking for blah, blah, blah. That's kind of what everybody does. So if you start asking other people questions about themselves, it's going to make you a little bit more memorable.
Introduce yourself and then say, you could even say, I'm a house flipper. What do you do? Correct. But I think as quickly as you can turn the conversation back to them, then they are much more interested in talking to you.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk about contractors. Boy, this is always a hot topic, and there's not a week that doesn't go by that I don't hear people complaining about contractors and showing up and everything that goes along with contractors. So let's talk about contractors.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough thing. It's tough for a homeowner who's, trying to find somebody to do a kitchen renovation. We get asked all the time about the contractors we would recommend. So what I will say is it does require some work, but it's a part of the puzzle that if you say, well, I don't want to deal with that, so I'm not going to do house flipping at all, it eliminates any possibility for you. It eliminates the possibility of finding the good crews. It eliminates the possibility of you making money or, having that rental or creating a house that you love for your own family or having a business. So, you can't get too hung up on any one of these things. It is challenging to have somebody else that you're relying upon, but expectations that are laid out with the contract can help with that. I have found contractors on Craigslist, which I know some people say that's not a good way to find them. I did that maybe 7-8 years ago, and the crew that I found, we ended up working with for about 4 years until they decided to take on more residential work. So it can work, because if you think about it, where do these guys advertise? They either advertise on job sites, so that's a tip. And this is something, again, if you're thinking about getting started in house flipping, you can start doing this now. Drive around neighborhoods. If you see a construction sign and a crew on a job site, that's a really good sign. That means they showed up, right? At least once. Carry a little notebook, jot down companies' names and phone numbers, call them and say, hey, do you guys do investment properties? Because some contractors won't do investor work. They'll only do residential client work. Eliminate them right away. I would also say, when you're collecting those numbers and talking to those folks, if they say no, or that they're too busy or they're booked out for 6 months, ask if there's anybody else they would recommend. Because, they might have somebody that they know who's just getting started, maybe broke off from a larger company. That's an idea. Also, the trucks in the Home Depot parking lot or Lowe's or Menards, if you've got those home improvement stores, those can be good resources. I prefer to see them earlier in the morning, because that means they planned their day well. That helps with scheduling. I've even like snapped pictures of cars like while they were driving by.
I've done that.
And I mean, honestly, we have, I have a guy who does custom metal work for me now, custom railings, interior and exterior. And I found him because I snapped a picture of his truck, because the one company that I had called that somebody had referred me to was priced 10 times higher. than he was. And it wasn't in my budget to do these custom metal railings that I really wanted. And he was really reasonable. And so he's done probably a dozen houses for me now. So it's just kind of a matter of keeping your eyes open. I will say too, when I'm walking through the house with people getting bids, I want to feel comfortable with them. So I'm very aware of how people are speaking to me, how people are asking me questions, how people are kind of observing the list that we're going through, because I do a list of repairs that I need them to give me a bid on, because I need to be able to work with somebody who is going to be receptive if there's something that needs to be reframed, or if we need a different, if the soffit height needs to be changed. So that's really important, that when you're speaking with somebody that you get that good sense. And I will say, if you have an appointment to meet with somebody and they don't show up and they call you after and say their truck broke down, just cross them off your list.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were talking about snapping pictures, I was in the gas station just a few days ago, and I was looking for a pressure washing company in this area to do the deck, and the guy was in the truck next to me pumping gas, and I snapped a picture of his truck, and I thought, if he turns around, he's gonna think that was really weird. But that's a really good way to do it, so that you don't lose the information.
Right. Well, I mean, they're advertising, so they expect people to call them from that. So why not?
Yeah. And you made a good point about if they call right in the beginning or don't show up or whatever, it's a red flag.
Yes.
It's kind of like dating. You should, if your date doesn't show up on the first date, they should be on their very best behavior in the beginning. And that's the same way with contractors. If they start out that way, you can bet that is their best behavior.
And I would also say, make sure that you've got more than one coming in to give you a bid, and take one day and block it off for all your trades to come in. Because the other thing is, you could have 3 or 4 electricians come through, you might get one bid. Because that's the other part of it. They not only have to show up to give you the estimate, they have to send you the estimate. And I can't tell you how many times that has happened, where we've met with people and then they don't ever come back with numbers. So then obviously they're not even in the equation, but then you have nothing to compare it to either if you did get one bid. So make sure you're getting multiple bids, especially when you're starting.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea to always rebid your jobs, because that keeps your contractors honest.
It does. It does. But also, knowing what the market is doing. And so, we've had material increases like crazy in the last 6 to 8 months, and we get letters from the suppliers about windows and siding and roofing. So then we also know that if our bids are going up and our contractors are providing those materials, we know that that's part of the equation too. So.
Right. Now you talked about the having a list. Let's talk about the scope of work. That needs to be something that you're very clear on with your contractors. And I believe it needs to be in writing. What do you believe?
I believe that is absolutely correct. Because when it comes down to the contract that you're going to sign with them, you're going to have certain benchmarks or points where you're making payments to them. I don't ever do a blanket contract where I say, on this date we do this much money, this much money, this much money. I do progression payments. So the crews we work with primarily now, we've been with long enough that I know what they usually need to start. When I first started doing this, we would have people ask us for 50% down.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I would say that's bananas, because there is no job in the world that pays you half the money before you ever show up.
No.
I don't do that, but I do progression payments. So, we'll have a down payment to get the job started. Because again, they're paying crews, but the crews haven't done any work yet. So they shouldn't need a lot of funding initially. But, we've also got it set up where, they get a payment after drywall is installed. So that means they've had all their rough-in inspections done and they've passed everything. So that's usually their first payment. And then we do a couple more along the way, and then we do a final payment that isn't due until after they've closed out all their permits and everything is done to code. But what I will say with the scope of work is the contract. That's the first 2 or 3 pages, depending on how big the project is. So we can literally go through and say, did they do this? Did the windows get replaced? But then they can also effectively estimate, because they know everything that's expected. And those contracts and those scopes of work are very detailed. If it is demo the kitchen, it is demo the kitchen cabinets, the floors, the countertops, the appliances, because the last thing you want to be doing is haggling with somebody over, I said paint all trim, and they're like, but you didn't say window trim.
Oh, yeah, good point. So more detailed on the scope of work, spell it
Absolutely.
out, and make sure that you include anything. One thing that tripped me up in the beginning was I would allow people to give me verbal, we change orders. Like if we say, I need to maybe put in a different door or whatever, I made the mistake of not doing those in writing. And I learned the hard way that change orders, everything needs to be in writing.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Okay. So that's the skinny on contractors. And now would you say you give them 4 or 5 draws or something like that?
We typically do 4 to 5, depending on how big the overall budget is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did. And when I was working with investor-friendly banks, they determined, of course, they would come out and do progress inspections for releasing the money, which meant I could pay the contractors. And there were also always, depending on the scope of the job, always at least 4, sometimes 5.
Correct. Yep, that's pretty typical.
Yeah. So just so you know, the bank I used, they charged $75 every time they came out. So it was like, okay. So now you've got your contractors, you've done your flip, the contractor's all done, and it's time to sell the flip. Where do you start with that part?
So one of the things I see people most often do when they're ready to list their flip is they didn't allocate any money in the budget for professional photographs or for staging. So I would encourage you, when you're putting your project together and you're putting your budget together, that you include those 2 items, because every buyer right now, the first showing of your house is actually online. And what are they seeing? They're seeing photographs. So if you're staging your house, it's already looking much more valuable and much more likely going to get you that price point that you're looking for, and maybe even multiple offers. If it looks good, if it looks like there's a lot of space, if it looks like you can have that, 4-bedroom house with an office and the living room, kitchen, dining room, that's what people love to see. They love to see usefulness in a house. If you've got great open spaces, but they're not defined, people don't necessarily assess them a level of value that they should. So I would encourage you to do that. And I would say good staging can be $3,000. And know too that staging and styling are 2 different things, because I tend to do more styling with my properties, but that's just because of my experience and my personal design sense that I like to incorporate into the properties. But staging companies, look online, find a good one, get a referral potentially, and know that can really help with the value of your sale.
So people are going to say, okay, I don't have $3,000 to do that. So your argument is you're going to get that and more back.
Correct.
For staging.
Correct. Absolutely. And if you're going to spend money on professional photographs, right, then if they're photographing empty spaces, it's not translating to your buyer, right?
Right.
So if you draw more attention to your listing and, people are looking online on Zillow and Redfin and Realtor.com, they're going to most likely go right past a home that is not as attractive visually as one that is. So I would say absolutely, to me, that is as critical as curb appeal on a house, is interior staging. Because I've also had it where people didn't realize they could put a king size bedroom or bed in a bedroom. They thought the bedroom was too small. So they didn't submit an offer because they thought the bedrooms were too small. You're helping somebody see themselves live in your house, and that is invaluable.
Right. Right, and there are a lot of tips and tricks you can use with the furniture sizing, and there are ways that you can do part of that on a budget too. So that's another whole conversation. But when she comes to styling, home goods is your friend. Let me just say that you can really make a place look nice with home goods stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess the final question I'd like to ask do you have some final advice for people, or some advice based on your experience for these people if they want to become house flippers, if that's the business they want to build?
Yeah, I would say action is going to be the only way you know if this is the right path for you. And anything we do for the first time is scary, whether it be if we leave our job and take a new job, whether we move to a different city, whether we get married or add to our family. Everything you haven't done before is scary. And the same thing applies for house flipping. But if it's something that you feel is of interest to you and it's tugging on your heart that this is the path you should try, you're never going to know if it works until you try it. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I was brave enough to do that, or silly, I don't know what it was. I ultimately, at the core of why I did what I did, was I had a husband who traveled. I was in a career that wouldn't allow me to grow unless I was willing to make some changes that included travel. And we had a family. Mm-hmm. And I needed a way to create a financial future for us that didn't involve our absence. And I, for the first 7 years of one of my daughter's lives, I was never home in the morning because I would leave to go to the office and she would have a sitter with her, mm-hmm. who happened to be my mother, which is very unfortunate. But your children aren't young forever, and so the last, 6 years that I've been doing this, I've been able to volunteer in my kids' classrooms, go on field trips, and just having that flexibility to do those things and be the parent that I want to be, while building a business as an example for them, has been something I never even could have imagined 13 years ago when I was on this adventure, when I started. So it was worth it.
It's about building a life, not only building a business, but building a lifestyle for your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I know that you have just released a course that you created called House Flip Blueprint. And why don't you take just a minute and tell people how this can help them get started on their journey to be a kick-butt flipper like you?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but if that's what they want, I'd love to have people get to that place too, because it is life-changing. The House Flip Blueprint course, I came up with that idea because when I was getting started, like I said, I felt like there was information everywhere. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all in one place, and I didn't really have a clear path on what I was supposed to do. So, literally, like I said, I was putting bandit signs out at midnight on the weekend, on Friday and Saturday nights, so the city wouldn't pull them. And I didn't really know what to do when I got the phone calls from people about houses, and I didn't really know what my options were for financing and how to pay for things, and I didn't really know how to put a scope of work together. There wasn't any one place I could go and get all of these steps. So that was the reason for creating this, is because there's 4 modules and they walk you through the steps that you can take. And some of them you don't even have to be, you don't even have to be ready to buy the house to start putting these steps together, because I realized sometimes that there's a little bit of a runway. People need some time. So, meeting with agents, what questions do you ask them to find out if they're the right agent for you? Putting together a scope of work, how to put a budget together, what different options for financing. All of that is in this course, mm-hmm. and hopefully it's enough information to get you to start planning and eventually get you to move to submit that first offer.
Okay, and so they can find that at houseflipblueprint.com?
Correct, yes.
Okay, now I know that you've got a freebie that people can get, whether, in addition to the course. So tell them what's the best way to find that.
So that can be found on our thresholdhomesmn.com website. It is 8 tips to find the perfect fixer-upper. So when I go through a house, I'm looking for some key things right away to decide if it's a good project to take on and if there's value that can be added and if there's potential. So this list has those things. You can print it off and actually walk through a property and check off things as you look at them and decide if it's a good project or not.
That sounds like the perfect thing for people just getting started. Well, thanks so much, Amber, for coming on today. And guys, I'll put all the links in the show notes. And I think that's a wrap for today. So thanks for showing up here to listen. And I'll be back soon with another episode of Let's Talk Real Estate Investing. Bye for now.